The applause was still echoing across the lakeside patio when my father lifted a thick manila folder into the air like it was the final surprise of my brother's engagement party. "There she is," he announced into the microphone with a grin. "Our daughter Gina has one last gift for Daniel and Melissa." More than 150 guests turned toward me. I froze. I hadn't planned any gift presentation. My mother stepped beside me, smiling so brightly it almost looked rehearsed. She placed the folder on the cocktail table in front of me and flipped it open. Inside were property transfer documents. My lake house. For a second, I honestly thought it had to be some kind of joke. Daniel laughed and wrapped an arm around his fiancée. "Come on, Gina," he said. "You know we'll take great care of it." Guests started clapping again. Someone even shouted, "That's an incredible wedding gift." I looked from the papers to my parents. "What is this?" My mother's smile never moved. "Just sign, sweetheart. We already had everything prepared." I never agreed to this. The applause slowly faded. Dad lowered the microphone and leaned close enough that only I could hear him. "Don't embarrass this family." I pushed the folder back across the table. "I'm not signing." His face hardened instantly. Then, without another warning, his hand crashed across my face. The force spun my head sideways. My phone flew from my hand, bounced across the stone patio, and skidded several feet before stopping near the edge of the lawn. The music stopped. Every conversation died. 150 people watched in complete silence. Instead of arguing, I bent down, picked up my phone, brushed a few scratches off the screen, and walked away from my family. I dialed a number I hadn't touched in almost 3 years. The call connected on the first ring. "It's happening," I said quietly, "exactly like Grandpa predicted." "I understand," the voice replied calmly. "Stay where you are, I'll be there." I slipped my phone into my pocket and stood alone near the lake, while the party behind me struggled to pretend nothing had happened. The cool evening breeze carried the sound of awkward conversations restarting in broken pieces. No one knew whether to congratulate my brother or ask if I was all right. Neither of my parents came after me immediately. They were too busy reassuring Daniel's future in-laws that everything was just a misunderstanding. That hurt almost as much as the slap. Not because of what Dad had done. Because they expected everyone to believe I was the problem. The lake stretched quietly behind me, reflecting the orange light of the setting sun. Across the water, I could just make out the roof of the old house my grandfather had left me. Most people saw a valuable piece of waterfront property. I saw every summer of my childhood. Every fishing lesson before sunrise. Every splinter from rebuilding the dock beside Grandpa after storms rolled through. Every evening we spent on the porch while he told me stories that never sounded important until years later. He hadn't left me that house because I was lucky. He'd left it because I was there. When arthritis made it hard for him to carry groceries, I came. When he needed rides to medical appointments, I rearranged my work schedule. When everyone else claimed they were too busy, I stayed. Daniel visited on birthdays. Sometimes Christmas. My parents always had excuses. Yet somehow, tonight, they had decided that Grandpa's final gift belonged to Daniel instead. Looking back, I realized there had been warning signs. Mom had recently started asking strange questions about the deed. Dad kept saying things like, property should stay with the whole family. Daniel had even joked about adding a second boat dock, before anyone had ever mentioned giving him the place. I had dismissed every comment. Now I understood they hadn't been jokes at all. The entire engagement party had been built around trapping me in front of a crowd too large to disappoint. Behind me I heard raised voices. Then tires rolled slowly over the gravel driveway. I turned. A black SUV pulled through the entrance gates. Across the patio, my father looked toward it. The confidence disappeared from his face so quickly it almost didn't seem real. His lips parted. His skin turned pale. Barely above a whisper, he muttered, "Why is he here?" I stayed where I was near the shoreline, while the party behind me tried to stitch itself back together. The band started playing again, but the music sounded forced. Conversations came in scattered bursts. Every few seconds, I caught someone looking in my direction before quickly looking away. My cheek still stung where Dad had hit me, but I wasn't thinking about the slap anymore. I was thinking about Grandpa. The lake house stood quietly across the water, exactly where it had been for more than 60 years. To everyone else, it was prime waterfront property worth a fortune. To me, it was the last place where life had ever felt uncomplicated. I could still hear Grandpa laughing as he handed me my first fishing rod. "Don't yank too hard," he'd say. "Let the fish think it's winning first." When storms damaged the dock, we repaired it together one board at a time. When the roof leaked, we spent an entire weekend replacing shingles under the summer sun. "You're learning more than carpentry," he'd tell me. "You're learning that the things worth keeping usually require the most work." Daniel rarely came. Whenever Grandpa invited him, there was always another golf outing, another weekend trip, another excuse. I never judged him for it. I simply showed up. During Grandpa's final year, I practically lived at the lake house. I drove him to appointments, organized his medications, cooked meals, and sat with him on quiet evenings when talking took too much energy. One afternoon, while we watched the sunset from the dock, he looked at me thoughtfully. "Some gifts aren't meant to be shared equally," he said. I smiled. "I know, life isn't always 50-50. He shook his head. "No, some gifts are earned." At the time, I assumed he was talking about trust. Now I realized he had been talking about the house. Thinking back over the past few months, more pieces suddenly fell into place. Mom had called me twice asking where I kept the original deed. She'd laughed when I asked why. "Oh, just curious." Dad had started saying things that seemed harmless then. A place like that should stay available for everyone. Families shouldn't let one person control something so valuable. Even Daniel had walked through the house after Grandpa's funeral, pointing at the walls. "I'd knock this one out," he'd said casually. "Open the kitchen up, Melissa would love that." I remembered staring at him. "You mean if you ever bought a place like this?" He'd only smiled. Now that smile made perfect sense. None of those conversations had been random. They'd been testing me, preparing me. Then another memory surfaced. About 6 months before Grandpa passed away, he had handed me a folded card with a phone number written inside. "If anyone ever demands this house from you," he'd said quietly, "don't argue." What should I do? He looked directly into my eyes. "You make one phone call, only one, promise me." "I promise." Standing beside the lake, I slipped my hand into my pocket and felt that old card still tucked behind my driver's license. I had finally used the number. But one question still echoed through my mind. Who had Grandpa expected to answer that call years after he was gone? I didn't have to wait long before my father came storming across the lawn. His dress shoes sank slightly into the soft grass, but he never slowed down. "There you are," he snapped. "Get back inside." I kept my eyes on the lake. "I'm staying right here. This party isn't about you." "No," I replied. "Apparently it's about my house." His jaw tightened. Guests had started drifting toward the patio doors. Some pretended to refill their drinks while watching us. Others stood in small groups, whispering behind raised glasses. The slap had changed the mood of the entire evening. Dad lowered his voice. "You've made your point. Now stop acting childish and sign the papers." "I'm not signing anything." "You don't have a choice." I looked at him. I already made my choice. Behind him, Daniel walked out with Melissa close behind. My mother followed, forcing another smile that looked even more strained than before. Daniel spread his hands. "Gina, seriously, you're picking a house over your own family." Before I could answer, Melissa looked confused. "What exactly is going on?" My mother immediately stepped in. There was supposed to be a surprise tonight. She turned toward Melissa's parents, who had also wandered outside. We promised Daniel and Melissa that the lake house would be their wedding retreat. Her words landed like a punch. She hadn't said they hoped I'd give it to them. She said they had already promised it, using property they didn't own. Melissa's father frowned. You mean you don't actually own that house? Silence. Then every eye shifted toward me. I answered before my parents could. My grandfather left it to me. It's legally mine. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Dad pointed a finger at me. That inheritance can still be challenged. I folded my arms. On what grounds? We'll find grounds. You'd drag Grandpa's estate through court. If that's what it takes. Several guests instinctively pulled out their phones. The moment no longer felt like a family disagreement. It felt like evidence. Mom noticed the phones first. Please, she said nervously, there's no need to record this. No one stopped. Daniel looked between our parents and me. You're seriously willing to do this over one piece of property? It's not about property, I said. It's about Grandpa's wishes. Dad scoffed. Your grandfather made a mistake. I shook my head. No. For the first time that evening I smiled. He knew this day was coming. The words hit Dad harder than I expected. His confidence cracked. What are you talking about? I told you, I said calmly. Grandpa prepared for this years ago. Before anyone could speak again, headlights swept across the driveway. The black SUV rolled to a smooth stop. The driver's door opened. An older man in a dark suit stepped out carrying a worn leather document case. My father's face drained of color. Under his breath, barely loud enough for anyone but me to hear, he whispered. He wasn't supposed to come. The man in the dark suit didn't hurry. He stepped out of the black SUV, closed the door behind him, and walked across the driveway with the steady confidence of someone who already knew exactly why he had been called. He didn't look at my father. He didn't acknowledge my mother. He came straight to me. Gina Harper. Yes. He gave a small nod. My name is Thomas Avery. He held up a leather portfolio. I served as your grandfather's attorney for 32 years. The crowd fell completely silent. Dad took one step forward. Tom, this isn't necessary. Mr. Avery didn't even turn his head. Instead, he asked me one simple question. Did anyone attempt to pressure you into signing away your ownership of the lake house today? I looked him in the eye. Yes. Were there witnesses? I slowly glanced around the patio. Nearly every phone was still pointed in our direction. There are more than enough. Mr. Avery nodded once. Good. He faced the guests. If any of you recorded today's events, I respectfully ask that you preserve those recordings. They may become important evidence. A ripple of surprised whispers spread through the crowd. Dad finally lost his composure. Evidence, he barked. This is a private family matter. Mr. Avery turned toward him for the first time. No, Mr. Harper. His voice remained calm. It stopped being private the moment coercion occurred in front of over 100 witnesses. Dad opened his mouth to argue. Mr. Avery continued before he could. Your father anticipated this possibility years ago. The words landed like a hammer. Mom's face drained of color. Richard forced out a nervous laugh. You're making this sound ridiculous. I assure you, Mr. Avery replied, your father did not. He opened the leather portfolio, just enough to reveal a thick sealed envelope, with my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting across the front. Dad's confidence vanished. No, he whispered. Mr. Avery closed the portfolio again. Not yet. He looked back at me. Your grandfather instructed me not to read this until I confirmed an attempt, had been made to force you into surrendering the property. Every guest seemed to lean in. Daniel stared at our parents. What is he talking about? Neither of them answered. Instead, Dad stepped closer to Mr. Avery. Tom, let's discuss this somewhere else. There is nothing to discuss. Mr. Avery removed 2 official-looking envelopes from his case. Richard Harper. He handed one directly to my father. Elaine Harper. The second went to my mother. Neither of them reached for the papers immediately. You've both been formally notified that any further attempt to pressure, intimidate, or induce Ms. Harper into transferring the lake house constitutes a direct violation of the Harper Family Trust. Mom blinked. Though what trust? The trust your father established before his passing. Dad grabbed the envelope with trembling fingers. You can't be serious. I am entirely serious. Melissa looked at Daniel in disbelief. You told me your parents owned that property. Daniel looked just as stunned. They told me they did. Her father folded his arms. So this whole promise was based on something that wasn't even yours to give. No one answered him. The silence was answer enough. My mother suddenly walked toward me, her confident smile gone. Gina, she said quietly, please, tell him this has gone far enough. I looked at her. For years I'd been expected to smooth things over. To stay quiet. To sacrifice. This time I didn't rescue anyone. I simply stood there. Mr. Avery carefully removed the thick sealed envelope from his portfolio. He held it in both hands. The familiar handwriting on the front caught my breath. Then he looked directly at everyone gathered around us and said, Your grandfather left one final instruction for tonight. No one spoke. The only sounds were the gentle waves against the dock and the rustling leaves above us. Mr. Avery broke the wax seal with careful hands. He unfolded several pages, adjusted his glasses and began to read. If you are hearing this, he said, then someone has attempted to pressure my granddaughter Gina into surrendering the lake house I left her. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Mr. Avery continued. I hope I was wrong, but after watching my family for many years, I no longer believed hope alone would protect her. My father stared at the ground. My mother wrapped her arms around herself but said nothing. The lake house belongs to Gina for one simple reason, Mr. Avery read. She earned it. His words took me back to every sunrise on that dock, every hospital visit, every quiet evening I spent with Grandpa when everyone else had somewhere more important to be. When I needed help, the letter continued, she never asked what she would receive in return, she simply came. Several guests lowered their eyes. Even people who barely knew our family could feel the weight of what was being said. I love all of my family, Grandpa had written, but love does not require me to ignore the truth. Mr. Avery turned the page. I feared that after my death, Richard would convince himself that my wishes no longer mattered. I also feared he would use guilt, public pressure, or family obligation to force Gina into giving away what I intentionally entrusted to her. My father's shoulders sagged. He knew every word was true. Because of that, Mr. Avery continued, I transferred the lake house into the Harper Family Protective Trust before my passing. Several confused murmurs spread through the crowd. The trust expressly forbids any transfer made under pressure, intimidation, or emotional coercion. Even if Gina signed documents today, those documents would have no legal effect. I finally understood why Grandpa had insisted I keep that phone number. He hadn't simply planned for the house. He had planned for me. Mr. Avery looked up from the letter. My appointment as independent trustee became active the moment Ms. Harper confirmed today's events. He glanced toward my parents. The trust also contains another provision. Dad closed his eyes, almost as if he already knew what was coming. Any beneficiary found attempting to interfere with the trustee's protected property immediately forfeits future discretionary distributions from the Harper Family Trust. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad whispered no. Mr. Avery nodded once. As of this evening, both Richard Harper and Elaine Harper are permanently removed as beneficiaries. The words landed harder than the slap ever had. Melissa slowly turned toward Daniel. Did you know any of this? Daniel looked completely broken. I swear I didn't. For the first time that night I believed him. He had expected a wedding gift. He hadn't realized our parents had built that promise on a lie. Melissa's father stepped forward. I think it's best our families end this evening here. One by one, guests quietly collected their coats and left. No one congratulated my parents. No one defended them. The celebration they had worked so hard to control dissolved into embarrassed silence. Over the following weeks, videos recorded that night spread throughout our extended family. There was no way to rewrite what had happened. No version where I had overreacted. No version where Dad hadn't struck me. No version where my parents hadn't tried to take something that was never theirs. Daniel apologized to me a few days later. I should have asked questions instead of believing them, he admitted. I know, I said. We weren't suddenly close. But for the first time in years, we were honest with each other. I chose not to celebrate what happened to my parents. They had lost more than access to Grandpa's trust. They lost the respect of nearly everyone who had witnessed that night. More importantly, they lost the ability to control me. A few months later, I stood alone on Grandpa's favorite dock as the sun rose over the lake. The house looked exactly as he had loved it. I repaired the porch swing we'd built together. I replaced a few weathered boards on the dock. Friends filled the house with laughter instead of demands. For the first time since Grandpa passed away, it truly felt like home again. I sat at the end of the dock and looked across the calm water. Thank you, I whispered. Not for the house. For believing I was worth protecting, even after you were gone. That night, my parents tried to take Grandpa's final gift from me. Instead, they gave me something they never intended to. The freedom to stop living under their control forever.